Hello everyone and welcome back to our Scratch track. So this is the fourth video and I hope you guys have been enjoying the videos so far. If you remember last week we talked a little bit about advanced motion and how to get our Scratch character to actually do new things like move forward, move backwards, and jump. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, this week we're going to focus on events. Now, if you're wondering what an event is, essentially when one thing happens and it triggers a series of other actions. So in our case, we're going to be using events as when the user does something specific, then the code will automatically perform a series of actions that we tell it to. So in games, this can be really useful, like when you press the forward arrow key, your character in a game will move forward. When you press the backward arrow key, it'll move backward, and when you press the space or up arrow key, it'll jump. So we're going to try to implement something similar in our demo today. Now, if you guys are working towards a bigger project, which I really hope you are in Scratch, then this will be a really important feature for you guys to add in. So how do we exactly add an event? And the way to do this is to go to the code tab, which I'm already on, and then I'm going to go to events, and it brings me a series of new blocks that we can add into our code so that we can use it to add new features and essentially actions like I just talked about. So which event are we going to use today? Well, because I want to implement a jumping feature when the user presses a spacebar, I'm going to take when space key pressed and add it over here. Now, it doesn't have to be a space key. It can be, you can choose space, up, down, right, left, or anything. And it lets you choose all the letters and numbers that display on a keyboard as well. But for right now, we're just going to be using the space. Now, what do we want it to do when space is pressed? Well, what we want it to do is we want it to jump. If you remember last class, we talked about something that we can do to get our sprite to jump. We added these two blocks that help it glide up and glide down, essentially the jumping feature. So we can just move these two blocks and put it under this event. Now, what's going to happen is when the green flag is clicked, all of these events will occur as normal, and whenever you press the space bar, these events will occur. Now, I'm going to tell you something right now. I talked before about how in Scratch, one block will completely finish occurring before the next block starts. So it'll finish saying good morning for 2 seconds, and then it will glide after it's finished gliding, and then it will switch costumes, and so on. But when you have two separate events, they can have actions occur simultaneously. For instance, when we have the character jump, it can jump while the first event is occurring, or the first set of actions, such as saying good morning. So if the sprite is saying good morning, which is a part of this event, it can jump as well, which is a part of the second event. Now, I'll show you guys how this works in a second, but let's take a look at what we've done. So we have the sprite say good morning, it slides forward, it slides back, and it faces forward again. So the jump didn't happen. Well, that's because we didn't press the space key. So if we press the space key now, the sprite jumps. But what happens if we try to press the space key again? It does something a little bit weird, where it goes back and then forward. Why is this? Well, it's because if you look at the glide features that we have put in, it has specific coordinates, meaning that the sprite will always go to these coordinates instead of going to new coordinates somewhere here. It will first glide to -100, -50 up here somewhere, and then back to -20, -108, which is over here. So every time you click space, it'll go here and here, instead of moving forward. And how do we change this? Well, one way to do it is to have it reset its position after each jump so that it can always keep going. So we can go to the motion block and click on go to, put this right here, and we can have it go to its starting position, which if you recall is -188, -108. So now if we have it jump, it'll do this. So it always resets. I mean, it makes sense. It works, but what if we wanted to keep going forward? Now we can do this, and I'll show you guys later why this isn't something you should implement, but I'll show you guys how you can do it if you are interested. So it works, and now to go forward, what can we do? Well, I'll tell you what we're not going to do is we're not going to keep these 3 blocks in. So I'm going to take these 3 blocks and just get rid of them. And if you want to get rid of blocks that you have, you can just take them and drag them somewhere over here and let go. They'll disappear. So what am I going to add now? Well, I don't want to specify the points of each coordinate every single time I jump. So we want it to just change by a fixed amount. We want to change the x and y values by the same number every time jump or the space bar is clicked. So if you look, there's actually a change x by and change y by block. We can add these into our code. So every time the space bar is pressed, it'll change x by 10 and y by 10. Now, I did some playing around with this, and I like the numbers 25 for x and 50 for y. You can obviously play around with it on your own and find any numbers that you think are better. But yeah, so I chose these numbers. So now I change x by 25 and y by 50, but when I press the space bar, it just goes up. If I press again, it keeps going up. So it is moving forward, but it's not coming back down, not doing it in the way we want. How do we do this? Well, we want to change x again after it goes up. So we can do change x by, and then change this to 25. Let me just move this character back down here so we can play around with it a little bit more. And then we want to change y by not 50, but negative 50, because we want it to go up and then we want it to come back down. So it's going to go 50 units up and then it's going to go negative 50, so 50 units down. Because when you jump, you go up and you return to the same starting position. I talked about this a little bit in our last lesson as well. So we have this. It should work. It should change x, then change y, then change x, then change y, right? But it doesn't. It only moves forward. Why is this? It's because when you have this in the way that you do, it's changing x by 25 twice, so by 50. The program interprets it as something similar, so it does 25 and 25 and automatically just does 50 instead of doing it twice. And as for the y, it adds the two together, so it does 50 plus negative 50, which is 0. So it doesn't move up or down at all. Now, this isn't exactly something we want. We want it to go up, wait for a very short time, and come back down. How do we do this? Well, if you go to the Control tab, there's actually a block that does exactly that. It says, wait 1 second. So we can add this between the blocks. So what this should do, it should change x by 25 and y by 50. So it'll move up, and then it'll wait for a second, and then change x by 25. So keep moving forward, but moving down. Now let's see if this works. If you could tell, it did work, but it was really slow. So we can, again, play around with the time. You can try to do some numbers depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to do 0.25 seconds. So it's going to go up and go down and wait in the middle for a really short time. So if we try this again, we can see that it does that. And I'm just going to move it back here so we can see what happens. So every time I press the space bar, it's jumping again and again and again and again. But now look, if I keep going, it's going to jump off the screen. The background isn't moving. And that's because when you do something like this in Scratch, it's better for you to have, instead of the character moving and running across the screen, but the obstacles coming towards you. So if you remember in Happy Hop, the game I created, I had these rocks that would be sliding towards the penguin, and it would just keep coming faster and faster. And so instead of the penguin moving, the rocks would move towards the penguin, and the penguin would just jump up and down. Now, this is better because it gives the illusion of the penguin moving forward, when in reality, it's much easier to do because the objects are coming backward. Now, you can't actually move the background in this case, so the best option is for you to have the objects move towards the character because it'll give the best illusion or effect and the longest game if you want. So jumping forward isn't exactly the best choice for this case. And so to fix this, what we can do is simply put our sprite back into its position. We can get rid of the change by axis. We don't want it to move horizontally, just vertically. So that in the future, when we do add an obstacle that is coming towards our sprite, we can just have it jump up and down. Pretty basic. So we're just gonna, how do we do this? We just take the X by out. So we're gonna take the two blocks that say change X by, and we're going to get rid of them. And now we just have change Y by and change Y by. So let's see how this works. We're going to play. It says good morning, goes forward, goes backwards. And if we press the spacebar, keep jumping up and down without changing its position, which is exactly what we wanted it to do. So now that we've accomplished this, well, what else can we do? We have it jumping whenever we want it to. Now we can play around a little bit more with events that we get. And if you go to the events tab, you can see there's so many different things you can look at and choose when you want to play around with events. So we'll play around with one more. And we'll have it do nothing with motion, but rather the background, I guess. So let's add this block that says when sprite is clicked. So when the user clicks on the sprite, something will happen, but what? We don't know yet. So in our case, we're going to change the backdrop. How do we do this? Well, the same way we added the first backdrop, we're going to click choose a backdrop. And we can choose anything we want. In this case, I'm going to go for the desert. And now it changed the backdrop only to the desert, but I want it to only change when the sprite is clicked. So we can go to, not costumes, but click on this backdrops icon over here. And now the code disappears because we don't have any code for the backdrop itself. But we can go to this tab over here that says backdrops to see all of the backdrops that are defaulted. So we added this blue sky as the backdrop. If we look here, this is just a plain backdrop. There's nothing on it. This is the default that you get when you start a new project. And we're just going to get rid of this because we don't want that one anymore. And we want these two. So we want it to keep switching whenever we click on the sprite. So a way to do this is we're going to go here to click back on this cat to get your code. And then we're going to go to looks because we're going to change the appearance and what's appearing on the screen. So what we're going to add is we're going to do switch backdrop to, and then put this under the sprite or the events tab. So once we do this, every time the sprite is clicked, we're going to switch the backdrop to the desert. And let me just reset this to the blue sky so that you guys can see how this works. So we have it reset to the blue sky. Now we're going to go back. And so when the sprite is clicked, it's going to switch to the desert. So let's see how this works. I click on the sprite and it switches to the desert. Exactly what we wanted it to do. But I want it to switch to the blue sky now. And if I click again, nothing happens. That's only because it keeps switching to the desert. So problem solved. Let's switch to the blue sky. If I click on it, it switches to the blue sky. That's exactly what I wanted. But if I click again, it doesn't switch back to the desert. So to have it keep cycling through, we're going to choose another option. If you click on the drop-down tab, you can see there's so many different options that you can choose. So we can do next backdrop for this case. And so what this will do, it'll keep going to the next backdrop. Now, if you remember, we had these two backdrops. So when you click it, it's going to switch to this one. And when it's on this one and you click the sprite, it's going to cycle back to the first one. And it's just going to keep switching again and again every time you click. So let's take a look at this actually happening. We click play. Anything that happens, it switches. It switches again. It switches. Switches again and again and again. As many times as you want. And if you try to jump, You can just play around with it as much as you want, but you can kind of incorporate all of the different things we've had. And we can even do random backdrop. If you want, it'll completely randomize what we get. And out of the backdrops we already have. So we only have 2 in this case, so it's just going to do the same thing as switching. But if we had a lot more, like let's say 5, it would go in a random order. So that's it for all I have to talk about today. I hope you guys were able to understand how events work and how one thing can trigger something else. And also make sure that you know all of the blocks under different events can occur simultaneously with one another, but all of the blocks under a single event will occur one by one in the order. And that's all I have to talk about today. I really hope you guys gained a really good lesson from this. If you have any questions or suggestions, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help and take any, new comments you guys have. And I'll see you guys next week. Have fun.